Hello, hi, I'm back. You read the title, you saw the thumbnail. We know I'm here to do the Housemaid Is Watching plot summary. Some of you might be confused if you're a regular watcher because I did say last year I was planning to do this and then I DNF'd it because the book was really bad. And honestly, I wasn't planning on doing it. I was like, you know what, I did 1 and 2, but I'm not going to do 3. It's a bad book. I shouldn't do that to myself. And then the movie got announced. The Housemaid is being turned into a movie. I was like, oh dear. Am I going to have to make this summary? Am I going to have to pick up this book again? And I was, is there an English saying? In Afrikaans, the saying would be ek wik en weeg. So if you're South African, you know what I'm saying. If you're not, sorry, I don't know an English equivalent, but ek wik en weeg between the choices of doing it and not doing it. And then I went and looked at my previous summaries of The Housemaid Is Watching and then The Housemaid's Secret, I believe book 2 is called. And those are my 2 best performing videos. Specifically the first one, they're my most viewed, they're consistently getting more and more views. And so I was like, you know what? People love those 2 videos. They're my 2 best performing videos and a movie's coming out. So it really seems like it's written in the stars for me to make the 3rd book's plot summary. And so I present to you, I read The Housemaid Is Watching so that you don't have to. Before we get started, I do just want to say that I inserted my opinion into my notes quite a lot, but I made my notes as I was reading. So any predictions that I make was in the moment. I have not added any opinions post-reading. Just want to put that out there. All right? So first and foremost, this book takes place 11 years after book 2. So we start in the prologue, as with any Freida book, with an unknown narrator telling us that there is blood everywhere, their hands as well, and there's a dead body on the carpet. They're talking about how they can't hide the blood on them when somebody turns the unlocked front door, so they run away. And then we start with chapter 1, which is 3 months prior to the prologue. And we are in Millie's POV, because who else's POV will we be in? This is the housemaid. She is admiring her new house. I don't remember the address, but I do know the house number is 14. And she's married to Enzo, and she has a 9-year-old son named Nico and an 11-year-old daughter named Ada. Millie is now a social worker. While they're unpacking, because they're just moving into their new home, their neighbor from house 13 watches them through her window. Millie waves at this neighbor and they close their blinds. So that's odd. And then she meets her neighbor from house 12 named Suzette. They live in a cul-de-sac, by the way. Suzette is incredibly snooty and insults Millie's new house through backhanded compliments. And Suzette clearly thinks Enzo is one of the hottest men alive, and she's trying very hard to be flirtatious and to impress him. And then, to try and impress him, she calls Millie fat by insinuating that she's pregnant, which, by the way, we're on page 18 and we already have the first fat shaming instance. Freida cannot beat the fat phobic allegations. She will never beat them. But Millie's tubes are tied. She makes sure to tell us that her tubes are tied, so there's absolutely no way that she's pregnant. And then she also goes ahead to ensure us that she's not fat. She's just curvy and has a baggy t-shirt on, because God forbid your stomach isn't flat. My God, Freida, never beating the fatphobic allegations. If you don't know what I'm on about, watch all of my Freida videos. Just go on my account, type in Freida, or I'll list them down below, because this woman, every single book, there is an instance of disordered eating or fat shaming. Like, she will never ever beat the fatphobic allegations, in my opinion. I'm so sorry. She writes about way too much for it not to be a personal opinion. So Suzette then tells Millie, and therefore us, that Janice, the neighbor from house 13, is a busybody who doesn't leave the house much, and she enjoys watching people from her window. And that's essentially it. Later, they're having dinner together, and Millie is telling us how attractive her kids are, which is information I personally didn't need. That's kind of weird, because she's not oh they're so cute. It was like, oh, they're attractive kids, especially with Enzo's genes. They're gonna grow up. And it's like, girl, Girly, no, don't talk about your 9 and 11-year-old being attractive. That's weird. Enzo and Nico, her son, are begging to have a praying mantis as a pet, and so she agrees to it, even though she thinks bugs are creepy, which they are. After dinner, for some reason, we have to know that Enzo and Millie are going to do it, but then they have to stop because they don't have blinds or curtains, and they have a creepy neighbor that likes to watch people's houses. None of that was necessary at all. It was just so the chapter could end with Millie freaking out about why the house was so cheap compared to everything else in the neighborhood. Which, by the way, a lot of that happens, like really weird, just exposition, so that that chapter could end on a cliffhanger, which the cliffhanger isn't even a cliffhanger. It's just Millie being like, oh, but why is this a thing? It's like really, it's tension for the sake of tension, because nothing interesting happens until the 50% mark. Spoilers. The next day, Millie walks her kids to the bus stop since it's their first day at a new school, and that's where she sees her neighbor Janice. She's very old, and her son looks emaciated and is wearing a jumper even though it is very hot outside. And then Janice proceeds to warn Millie away from Suzette. I forgot what she said, but basically just like, don't go around her. So we have two neighbors saying don't go around the other one. Later that night, they go over to the whole family to Suzette's house for dinner, and they meet Martha, Suzette, and her husband Jonathan's cleaner, housemaid. She is staring very intensely at Millie, Martha. And then they meet Suzette's husband, and he seems very nice, and he's very sad about not having kids, while Suzette is very happy about not having kids. And the way that this is written definitely implies that people who don't want children are the spawn of Satan. So, love that. And then Martha, a few days later on Thursday, shows up to clean Millie's house because Enzo called and requested it. Nothing interesting happened at the dinner, really, just some backhanded insults, compliments from Suzette, and flirting with Enzo, so the usual. And so then Millie takes Nico to a play date at Janice's house, and Janice tells Millie about how no one wanted to buy the house that they bought, and they were the only bid. Janice complains about Suzette and tells Millie that Enzo is working in her garden as they speak. Millie starts to think about how Enzo has told her that he's frightened of her, and she's like, oh, he should be. And then that night, Millie wakes up at 2 a.m. to a scratching noise in her house. She freaks out because it sounds like someone is trying to escape. From what or why, we don't know. And then she goes downstairs to investigate, but the sounds grow louder, so she stops and turns around to go get Enzo. But as she's going to go get Enzo, the scratchy noises stop, so she just leaves it and goes back to sleep. Nico, the next day, breaks, or a few days later. I did a very bad job at keeping track of time during the first half, so sorry about that, but Nico breaks Suzette's window with him and Enzo are practicing baseball in their backyard, and he hits it and it goes through Suzette's window. I don't know how this cul-de-sac is laid out, but it's not making sense in my brain. Millie takes him over to apologize for the broken window, and she finds Enzo at Suzette's house again, and he didn't tell her that he'd be there, and he's working on their garden. She makes an arrangement with Suzette so that Nico can go over regularly and clean the house and do chores for them as a way of apologizing for the broken window. Millie is at the hospital that she works at, and she is taking care of an elderly woman. The elderly woman very clearly has dementia, and it's shown to us because the elderly woman asks Millie to fold her clothes for her, and then as soon as Millie starts folding the clothes, she starts screaming that she's stealing, she's a thief, and someone needs to stop her. But Millie, the social worker with a decade of experience, apparently can't tell that she has dementia, and it's the dementia kicking in. And she starts freaking out about being called a thief, even though, again, she's a social worker working with a patient with dementia. I feel like this would be a part of the normal situation. I feel like, what? What do I know? Millie's freaking out, which leads into a meltdown over her past and being in jail and being judged for it. And so one of the nurses that works in the hospital brings her over to take her blood pressure, help her calm it down, and she tells her that her blood pressure is very, very high. Millie rubs it off by saying that she's too young to have heart problems. So she's ageist and fat phobic. That's great. She goes home early and tells Enzo about what happened, and Enzo, being a good husband, is obviously very worried about her blood pressure and begs her to go see a doctor for it. He also says that they should get life insurance policies on each other. Millie is incredibly upset when she finds out that Suzette is the one that recommended an agent for this. However, at this point, they're probably in their late 30s. I don't think getting life insurance at this point is necessarily that crazy. But what do I know? Later that night, Nico goes to say goodnight to the kids. She's in Nico's room and she sees Enzo in Suzette's backyard. Again, they're just talking to each other pretty innocently, nothing nefarious is happening, but it is after 10 at night, so she immediately assumes that Enzo is hiding something from her. So the next morning, Millie wakes up thinking that there's a home invasion, but it's just Martha coming in to clean. Enzo apparently gave her a key, and she goes downstairs to find Martha rifling through their drawers. And then Millie finds a broken bowl and she blames Martha, but Martha says it wasn't her, and Enzo comes down saying that it must have been Nico, which, by the way, Millie has not liked Martha at all during any of this time. The staring really rubbed her the wrong way, and since then she's kind of just had a vendetta against her. They wake Nico up and he confirms that it was him who broke the bowl, and Millie kind of looks like a lunatic at this point, and she says that she doesn't trust Martha or Suzette. Enzo did end up getting his way though, so Millie is at the doctor for her blood pressure. They want to put her on medicine and do some extra tests to make sure that she's okay, but Millie is seething because only old people have blood pressure issues. I'm just saying there's a track record of opinions that aren't great, but who am I? So Millie gets home from the doctor to find out that Nico dropped a dish in Suzette's house and did not tell anybody, so they don't want him over anymore. Jonathan was the one to end up telling her this, but she sees that Suzette is watching the interaction, so Millie decides to flirt with Jonathan as payback for Suzette flirting with Enzo. However, Jonathan backs away immediately and goes inside, and Millie thinks that there must be something going on in their house. She is so annoying. Maybe he just likes his wife. Did you consider that, Millie? Maybe he doesn't want to flirt with you. Maybe he is loyal. And I'm not a Jonathan defender. I'm not a defender of anybody in any of these books except for Enzo. I'm an Enzo apologist. He's like the only likable character in these books ever. Millie comes home from work one day and her kids are missing. She goes to get Enzo from Suzette's backyard, hoping that the kids are with him, but they're not. So Millie freaks out and she's about to call the police, but Suzette doesn't want that, and Millie thinks that's suspicious, which is fair, because if your 9 and 11-year-old are missing and you can't find them, I think you should immediately call the police. They're children, you know? Enzo is looking for the kids and he finds a hidden door that's usually blocked by a plant in their house. It makes a scraping noise when they open it that Millie recognizes as the noise that she hears at night. Millie is obviously freaking out because who is coming in and out of their house. They then end up finding out that the kids were hiding in that room because they thought it was a playroom and they didn't hear that their parents were calling them. Millie gets the kids out of the room but mentions that Aura looked like she'd been crying before they were found, and they close and seal up the room the next day, but Millie is still just very worried. A bit later, Nico gets suspended from school for a week because he punched a kid in the face. The kid he punched was a bully and he did it to protect the victim, but we also find out that his praying mantis died and that he flushed it without telling anyone or seemingly caring that his pet died. And so at this point, it does seem like little Nico is turning into his future sociopath or something with the way she's raising him. Millie tries to plan a play date with Spencer, but Janice says no. She hates Nico and thinks that he's a bad kid and that Millie is a bad mother. And she says all of this to Millie's face. And then she also accuses Enzo of cheating on Millie. The next day or a couple of days later, Millie forgets her phone at home, so she drives back to get it. She's on her way to work at this point. She catches Martha stealing and fires her. It was a cheap necklace that Enzo gave her for her birthday several years ago, but either way, she's stealing, so she gets fired. Martha blackmails Millie by telling her not to tell Suzette about the fact that she caught her stealing if Millie wants to keep the fact that she's an ex-convict a secret. Enzo doesn't really seem to care that Martha stole from them because he has a soft spot for women. Bunch of question marks at this point. Kind of forgot that we'll get an answer to that whole statement later on, because a lot of this is like supposed to tie into the end of the story. However, because it was written so badly, half of the exposition that you get, you forget about completely. And it's only on a reread or in the situation where I took notes, they are like, oh, so that meant something. But the conversation then leads into about how Millie and Enzo have money issues, and Millie starts to wonder if all of this was worth it because they splurged on this house. They really couldn't afford it, and they're living paycheck to paycheck to cover the mortgage. Millie, Enzo, and Ada are now at Nico's baseball game, and Ada is reading a book by an author that Millie liked as a kid, and this makes her start to think about how sad her childhood was, which is just really random. Like, that never comes back. And then it's Nico's turn to bat, and he gets out at first base. Enzo screams no, and Nico starts to argue with the other teammate who got him out, and then Nico gets very angry and punches the kid. And so at this point, I'm like, is Nico going to be the bad guy at the end of this book? Are we gonna have a child murderer? So Nico gets kicked off the team, and because they have a no tolerance policy. We should start calling it a no tolerance. But good, because Nico is becoming increasingly violent, and that's worrying. On the drive home, the car is silent, and Nico doesn't seem upset at all that he got kicked off the team. So Millie is wondering what is wrong with her son. We are wondering that too. Enzo starts to defend Nico to Millie when they get home, saying that it's normal behavior and good to fight. And no wonder men suck if this is what they're told growing up. Nico doesn't seem sorry, nor does he acknowledge that he's wrong when his parents finally confront him. And Nico is also very coldly and impatiently waiting for his punishment. And once it's given, which is no devices for a month, he runs upstairs and slams the door. How about we put little Nico into therapy? Because that seems necessary. Thank God Millie thinks of this idea too, but Enzo says no because Nico is acting like a normal boy and it's just uptight American rules that's making Millie freak out. At this point, I'm like, I'm an Enzo apologist, but I don't know if I can apologize for this behavior. This is bad. Put your son into therapy. After dinner, Millie Googles psychopathy symptoms in children, thank God. And she says that she'll let the dust settle, but she refuses not to get help for her son, which is probably one of the few only good things that she's done so far in this book. We find out maybe a few chapters later that she did take Nico to see a pediatrician who also said, he's just being a boy. Therapy for Nico is one of the few things you'll catch me agreeing with Millie on. And get him a new pediatrician. I'm so sorry. I don't care that he's 9. Therapy is never a bad thing. Ever. It is the next day and Millie is getting ready to leave for work when she sees Suzette checking the post. Millie compliments her diamond bracelet and Suzette says it's from someone very special. So at this point, she's probably cheating on her husband with someone. Do we find out who, what, or why? Spoilers, no Well, we find out the why. We don't find out if she's cheating. We don't find out if she is with who the bracelet's from, why. None of that gets answered. Suzette then compliments Millie in turn by asking if she lost weight. Freida, I swear to God. Suzette then also asks that Nico, a 9-year-old, takes the trash out at 11 p.m. so that she doesn't have to see the unsightly thing. And quite frankly, I am losing my mind at this point of the book. The conversation gets interrupted because a plumber Millie hired earlier is here to call her out for giving him a bad check. Suzette hears all this and goes to get $300 cash to pay the guy because Millie does not have it. Millie then starts to wonder if Enzo made any big purchases without her knowledge, and every other chapter ends with a suspicious question that is so annoying at this point. Because in total, this book has 80 to 90 chapters, so it gets a lot very quickly. Millie calls the bank and they tell her that Enzo is the one that withdrew $1,000 from their account, and Enzo tells her that he needed to replace some equipment and thought that the money would be back in the account before she noticed. She believes him because she doesn't want to think that he's lying. The next day, Millie finds Enzo in the backyard smiling while on the phone. He tells her that Suzette has a really big client she wants him to meet the next day and that they're going to a private beach. Millie doesn't like the sound of this in the slightest. Also, the next day is a Saturday, I'm pretty sure. Millie wonders if he took the money out of the bank for the new bracelet that Suzette showed her, and then demands that he takes the whole family to the beach with him. It's the next day, they're on their way to the beach, and this whole stupid scene happens where Enzo gets pulled over and talks his way out of it, just so Millie can end the chapter by saying she never minded how good at lying he was until she thought it was to her. And then they get to the beach. Millie starts saying how she could never wear a skimpy bikini like Suzette. She only wears modest one pieces, even when she was in her prime at 25. Shut the fuck up. You are not better than someone else for wearing more or less fabric. Can we just put that out there? So, let's count. Fat shaming, ageist, slut shaming. Oh, and nuclear family enthusiast. So, am I the only one losing my mind? Then some more of the same happens. So backhanded compliment from Suzette. Suzette checks out Enzo. Jonathan is nicer than Suzette, probably because he's a man, and mild tphobia. Apparently, the people they were meeting canceled, so it's just them. Then some more of the same happens. So basically, Suzette being annoying and fat shaming. What else is new at this point? That's the whole goddamn book. Suzette then puts sunscreen on Enzo. Millie, stand up for the love of all that is good and pure. Suzette asks the kids if they want some of the sunscreen, and Nico glares at her, and Millie is shocked. I'm not. He's 9. I'm sure he can tell Suzette rubbing something on his dad is weird. Also, we don't actually know what he's glaring at her for. Spoilers. Jonathan walks with Suzette and Enzo to the water, but Suzette says no, go back, so he does. Millie starts to prod, but he keeps saying he doesn't mind. Nico is talking to Suzette in the ocean, and then all of a sudden they're screaming. And ends up being Suzette that nearly drowned, Enzo being the one who saved her, because of course. Suzette says something wrapped around her leg and pulled her under while Nico stares from far away. And at this point, I'm convinced that Nico will not be the psycho because there is way too much finger pointing at him. They all end up going home, and Millie is internally complaining the whole time about how touchy-feely Suzette and Enzo are after he saved her, which is valid because Enzo walked her to the car and they held hands. That night, while in bed, Millie insinuates that Nico is the one who grabbed Suzette and tried to drown her. Enzo says Nico was far away when it happened, but Millie is certain that he's lying to her. A week later, Millie wakes up in the middle of the night and Enzo is gone. She sees him pulling into the driveway and she confronts him and he lies. I was thirsty. While he's wearing jeans. Denim jeans. She obviously calls him out on that because no one puts on jeans to go get a glass of water, and then he tells her he went for a drive and gets back in bed, but she can smell another woman's perfume on him. 2 days later, she wants to confront Enzo. His car is in the driveway, so she goes over to Suzette's house. The door was unlocked and no one was answering, so she walks inside and finds Jonathan with a slit throat. We are on page 199, and this is the first interesting thing that has happened throughout that entire time. Also, her fingers on the door has to come back and bite her in the ass. There is still blood leaking from the neck wound, so it is a recent cut, stab, slit. Millie runs home and finds Enzo in the kitchen washing blood off of his hands, and he said that he cut his hand whilst working outside. He turns around and there is blood all over his shirt, and Millie worries that he's the one that killed Jonathan. Millie hears sirens even though she didn't call 911. She was about to, don't worry. Enzo tries to convince Millie that the blood on his shirt is his own. Even though she doesn't really believe him, she tells him to go change his shirt before the police get there. Suzette gets home 30 minutes later and cries when she finds out that her husband was murdered, but Millie thinks it looks fake. Have some empathy, Millie. Some empathy. You don't know what their home life was like. Maybe she's not sad. Nobody knows. We might find out. Millie is so annoying in this book, which is why I'm doing this, so that you don't have to read this, because my goodness, I would hate for anyone else to waste their time on this. Millie starts to interrogate Enzo, so he shows her the cut on his hand. Apparently, she thinks it's too shallow for how much it was bleeding, but he says that hands bleed easily and a lot because of all of the nerves that are in there. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, so I can't confirm nor deny his claims. Millie wants to believe Enzo incredibly badly, obviously, but says that if he did it, he was not the person that she thought he was, which is really funny coming from an actual murderer, lest we forget what happened throughout book 1 and 2. The police are knocking on their front door, and Enzo begs Millie not to tell them about the blood on his shirt because he knows how it makes him look. The detective is the policeman at their front door, and something tells Millie not to trust him. Probably because she's an ex-convict and doesn't trust cops at all ever. And that's not me being derogatory, just genuinely. Even she says it, I never trust cops. So that's not suspenseful. Millie decides to be honest and tell him that she found the body, but they were already on the way when she ran home to call 911 because she didn't have her phone on her. Apparently Janice, the nosy neighbor, heard shouting and called the police. Janice told the police she saw Millie enter the house, and she also mentioned that she saw Enzo walk through the front door 2 hours before the murder, and he never came out. After some prodding and cheating insinuations, the detective asks to speak to Enzo directly. And then after the detective leaves, Enzo and Millie decide to talk to the kids about what happened. They set them down on the couch, and she notices that Nico can't sit still and can't make eye contact. Nico doesn't look the slightest bit upset, and this really bothers Millie. And this whole time, Enzo has been zoned out, but the kids are gone, and he tries to convince her again that he didn't kill Jonathan and he did not cheat with Suzette. Millie swears that she believes him, even though she doesn't. And then the next morning, Enzo wakes up to a call from the police asking that both him and Millie go into the station to talk. Enzo and Millie decide to call Detective Ramirez, the detective from either book 1 or 2, I can't remember. Ramirez advises that they go down to the station and just talk since there's no evidence against them, and if they start asking leading questions, to stop and get a lawyer. When Enzo heads into the shower, Millie tells Ramirez about the blood on his hands. He tells her not to worry because Enzo is a very good person, and if he did kill someone, it must have been for a good reason. And then he advises not to mention the blood to the police. By the way, he's still actively a detective, so I don't think that that's entirely legal on his part, but you know. Millie decides to walk her kids to the bus stop after everything that happens, and she finds Janice and Spencer there. Nico seems really upset and is on the verge of crying because he doesn't want to go to school, and he asks if he can hang out with Spencer after school. Janice has a fit and tells Spencer he wasn't supposed to be hanging out with Nico after Nico got suspended from school for fighting. Millie is very confused because Nico went over to hang out with Spencer just the other day. That's when she realizes that Nico lied and he wasn't at Spencer's house. What a devious little 9-year-old. Millie confronts Nico and he says he just wanted to play outside alone and he didn't want her to worry, but she doesn't believe him. Millie and Enzo get to the police station and they are separated from each other. She realizes that they're in big trouble because it's the actual detective coming to question them rather than just a regular police officer. The detective does confirm that Millie is not a suspect. He starts insinuating cheating again between Enzo and Suzette. And then he asks her if she knew that Enzo illegally bought a gun. Jonathan was stabbed, so that must be a very sharp gun. I guess we also know what the missing 1K was for. The detective also informs Millie that Enzo checked into a motel with Suzette 4 nights ago, which I'm pretty sure is the night he came home smelling like another woman. The detective also knows about the bad check to the plumber and insinuates that they're struggling financially, which they are. Apparently, Jonathan had a substantial life insurance policy and Suzette is the sole beneficiary. After this statement, Millie says she's not answering any more questions without a lawyer. And so, if I didn't explain clearly enough at this point, the detective is insinuating that Enzo was cheating on Millie with Suzette and that they planned to kill Jonathan together and use the insurance money and split the insurance money because Enzo is struggling financially. Enzo was kept for 3 more hours and then finally let go, and once he comes out he looks terrible, which wouldn't we all after 3+ hours of prodding and investigating into our personal lives and being insinuated that we're a murderer. During the car ride home, Millie confronts Enzo and tells him that she smelt Suzette's perfume on him the night that he checked into the motel, and he confesses that he was with Martha, the cleaning woman Millie fired, the housemaid. Apparently, Martha's husband is abusive and he takes her paychecks, which is why she steals things, because she's trying to get away from him. One day, Enzo went over to give her her final paycheck, which Millie's not happy about, by the way. And that's how he saw bruises all over her and he knew he needed to help her. By the way, I didn't write this down, but Enzo never told Millie any of this because he was worried about her blood pressure. Enzo tells Millie that originally Martha wanted to speak to her and Martha knew about Millie's history of helping women like her. Millie then proceeds to give us a summary of her reputation to help abused women, like we didn't read the first 2 books in this awful trilogy. And this part also breaks the 4th wall because she's speaking directly to the reader, which doesn't fit the style of writing for the book at all and is really weird and uncomfortable. Enzo confesses that's why he was talking to Suzette late at night that one time, and he was trying to convince her that Martha wasn't stealing even though she was, so that Martha wouldn't get fired. The gun that Enzo purchased was also for Martha because her husband was coming after her for leaving. Millie says she believes Enzo about Martha, however, she still thinks that there is something that he's hiding from her. When they get home, Ramirez is parked in front of their house and he invites himself in to give them bad news. The detective thinks Enzo killed Jonathan and is currently building a case against him. He thinks Enzo and Suzette are having an affair and they plan to kill him for insurance money. We went over this. And I could have told them that. They should have been able to snuff that out after the first interview before this station. Ramirez also tells them that Janice is not only talking to the police, but she's been taking pictures. What a creep. They can't afford a good lawyer, so Ramirez found a new lawyer that he can pull some strings to defend Enzo in the trial. She's very eager to help them and apparently very good. The lawyer ends up being Cecilia Winchester, the daughter from book 1, which this is a twist I actually appreciated. Instead of Millie's first reaction being gratitude, she complains about how old she is and wonders if Cecilia has been keeping tabs on them. My God. Millie, have some goddamn gratitude. Cece tells them that the police are probably going to get a search warrant ready as they speak. Millie recalls that she never found Enzo's bloody t-shirt. She wonders why he would get rid of it if it wasn't his blood on the shirt. Enzo then explains everything that happened to Cece and asks her why the police would go after him so hard. Cece mentions the name Dario Fontana and Enzo is very shocked, which Millie apparently considers a violent reaction. Dario Fontana is from Enzo's time back in Italy, because if you forgot, he is Italian, born and raised. Dario was Enzo's sister's abusive husband that Enzo nearly beat to death, I forget. COC wants to talk about what further happened because she did a background check on him, but Enzo tries to get Millie to leave the room. She obviously refuses. Turns out Enzo started working for Dario, a mobster, at 16 and stayed for 8 years. He won't tell Millie what he did as a job, but it's probably something violent, all things considered. They move on from the topic and Millie brings up her concern about Suzette being the murderer. Enzo mentions that there is a way to park behind Suzette's house without driving into the cul-de-sac, which she showed him, so Janice wouldn't see her return home. Cece and Ramirez leave, so Millie uses her lost 30 minutes before the kids get home to hound Enzo about his past. Enzo confesses that he broke fingers of people who owed his boss money. Ew. But apparently he never killed anybody. But because of all of this, Millie has started to lose trust in Enzo, which fair enough. Later that night, when everyone falls asleep, Millie decides to go into Suzette's backyard to see if Enzo is telling the truth about being able to get in, but she runs into Suzette. Suzette says that Enzo murdered Jonathan because he was obsessed with her. She says that Enzo only married Millie because he felt trapped since she was pregnant. Enzo did marry Millie because she got pregnant with Oda, and Millie never told Suzette this. Suzette confirms that there is a way into the house without Janice seeing, and Millie notes that she doesn't seem upset at all that her husband is dead. The next morning, they're woken by the detective with his search warrant. Millie wakes up and takes the kids to a diner for breakfast, and the kids are very anxious. The kids know that their papa is a suspect, so Millie tries to convince them that everything will be all right, even though she doesn't think it will be. After dropping the kids at school, Millie goes to Martha's house looking for her. Her husband opens the door and confirms that Martha vanished about a week ago, and Millie is relieved. While Millie and Enzo are cleaning the house, Millie asks Enzo about Suzette's accusation from the night before. She does lie and say that this was a while ago, and Enzo says she must have done the math. Cece calls to let Millie know that the police found something and are doing tests right now. She doesn't know what they found though. She already called and told Enzo, but decided to call Millie too because it seemed like he would not tell her. This is all a secret though that they're not supposed to know. At bedtime, Nico asks a bunch of "Does doing a bad thing make you a bad person?" questions, but he won't tell Millie why he's asking. The next morning, they're all eating breakfast together. Nico and Enzo are planning to practice football, not the American kind. In the summer, Cece shows up to let them know Enzo is about to be arrested. Ramirez let Cece know that they found a possible murder weapon, a pocket knife with Enzo's initials stuffed into a drawer. It had traces of Jonathan's blood on it. Enzo confessed that he killed Jonathan. I personally don't believe him. I think it's one of the kids and he covered for them. All the signs are pointing to Nico being the murderer, but I think it's probably Oda for an unexpected twist. Enzo says that he killed him for the insurance money, and Millie wonders if Suzette is in on it as well. The police take him away, and Cece says she doesn't believe the money story. Millie goes up to tell her kids. She speaks to Oda first, who is crying uncontrollably. Oda confesses that she's the one who killed Jonathan. I knew it! I made that claim chapters ago. Then we go into part 3 and the point of view switches to Oda. The next chapter starts with How to Kill Your Creepy Neighbor, a guide from Oda Cardi, grade 5. Freida, what the fuck? Why'd you have to do that? Why couldn't it just be... So, cue the info dumping of 50 plus pages. Oda says that she doesn't want to leave the Bronx. This is before they moved. She's going to miss her friends and she likes the apartment, and Nico doesn't like the move either. While unpacking her new room, Otta starts to cry. Enzo sees this and comes to comfort her. Enzo promises her that if she still hates the new house in a year, they will move back to the old apartment. Otta has a bad day at school. The kids are weird to her, and she learns about Braden, an 8-year-old who went missing a few years back. Gabe tells her about this. He's weird and makes her uncomfortable. When Otta and Nico get home, Jonathan is standing at his window watching the bus. He waves at the kids and Otta thinks it's weird. It's a while later and Otta talks about how Nico is at Suzette's house for a long time for chores. This was when he broke the window. She says he gets quiet and weird after she asks him what they make him clean. And I really hate the direction that this is going. Nico is 9, and if it is what I think it is, this is absolutely terrible. Nico is struggling to eat dinner. He's locking himself in his room. He won't talk to anyone. Otta tries, but he's blocking her out. One day after school, Enzo says he's going to pick up Otta for ice cream. While she waits for him, the annoying kid, Gabe, shows up, and he's been bothering her this whole time. He asks her on a date. She says no. He asks if he can hold her hand. She says no. And then he grabs her hand and she pulls away, but he grabs her wrist, hurting her. Enzo sees and scares him off, but then talks to Otta about how sometimes boys don't listen when you say no. He gives her his pocket knife so she can protect herself, the one with the initials, but he does say to never use it unless absolutely necessary. Personally, I don't know if giving an 11-year-old a pocket knife is necessarily the best choice, but the conversation was good because we know what men are like. He tells her not to tell anyone, and she's happy that he's giving his knife to her because she's always wanted it. One weekend, Nico sneaks in through the back door with what looks like a pee stain on his shorts. Otta asks him what happened, and he says he spilled water. Otta doesn't believe him, but Nico makes her promise not to tell anybody. We get to the day the kids disappeared in the secret room. Otta catches Nico going in there, and he says that it's a clubhouse. Even though he says no girls allowed, he lets Otta come in, and she starts to freak out because of how small the room is and starts to cry. Nico says she should leave if she's going to cry, so she tries to stop and they read comic books together. Next, we're at the beach day and Otta is swimming in the ocean. She overhears Suzette threatening Nico. She says something to him along the lines of, "Don't you dare tell anybody about that." Otta gets so angry, she swims by Suzette's feet and pulls her underwater. One night, Nico comes into Otta's room with a sleeping bag, asking if he can have a sleepover. She notices that he has been crying, and then Nico proceeds to tell her everything. Jonathan and Suzette have a secret room as well, where Jonathan keeps expensive collectibles. Nico thought they were toys, and he played with one of them, and it broke. Nico was worried about his parents' finances, so Jonathan told him that to make up for it, Nico has to play with the toys that Jonathan built and tell him which ones he liked the best. Jonathan would watch him play in the little room with a camera. Nico confesses that the time he peed himself was because Jonathan didn't let him out of the room, and then Jonathan made fun of Nico for it. Suzette found out this was happening and told Jonathan to tell Millie Nico wasn't coming over anymore. But he told Nico in private to still come. Nico says no, but Jonathan then tells him he doesn't have a choice. Jonathan tells Nico that he'll sue their family and that they'd end up homeless. And Nico said that he'd tell his parents about the room, but Jonathan told Nico that he'd kill his family, and he said that he'd done something like this before. Everybody remember, Nico is 9 years old. This is a terrible age. Any age is terrible for this to be happening at, but 9? He's so small. The next day, Otta goes over to stand up to Jonathan on behalf of Nico. She goes into their house and it's empty. She sees where Nico described the hidden room to be and she just can't help herself. She looks inside. There's a bunch of toys in the room and then a bed. Otta goes in and pulls the covers open and finds a blood stain. Then Jonathan is in the room with her. Dun dun dun. Jonathan tells her he can't let her leave because he doesn't think she can keep a secret. Otta thinks about the kid that went missing, Braden, and decides that she doesn't want to end up like him. That's definitely Braden's blood. on the mattress. Oda then reaches for her pocket knife and stabs Jonathan in the gut. She runs out of the room and goes to look for her parents at her house. Nico finds her covered in blood, and Oda confesses that she thinks she killed Jonathan, thought he died because his neck was slit. Nico convinces her not to tell anyone, and she decides to clean the knife and wash her shirt. Now we're in part 4, back in Millie's POV. Thank goodness, because Oda's was difficult to read through. And let me tell you, Freida is not great at trying to pretend to be an 11-year-old, which I guess that's probably a good thing, but in terms of trying to be an author writing an 11-year-old, it wasn't that great. Millie is obviously very angry at Jonathan and understanding of Oda. She gets the bloody shirt and then calls Cece. Cece tells Millie she'll talk to Enzo and get everything straightened out. What Oda did was in self-defense, and she's also 11, so everyone should be fine if Enzo stays quiet. Later that night, Enzo calls Millie and she begs him not to confess. Enzo says that he's worried she'll get in trouble because she slit his throat. This bothers Millie because who slit his throat? Millie thinks Oda slit his throat but left that part out to make it seem like self-defense, which at this point that seems like a lot of plotting for an 11-year-old to be doing. Enzo is dead set on confessing, but Millie hopes one night in jail changes his mind. If he goes to jail, I'm burning my Kindle. Millie walks the kids to the bus stop the next morning and tells Janos off while she's there because Janos was being rude about Enzo in front of the kids. Then Ramirez shows up to her house and asks her to get in his car without an explanation, and she does. Ramirez makes Millie promise not to tell another soul about what he's about to tell her because he could lose his job for giving her this information. But once Millie agrees, Ramirez explains that Suzette's fingerprints were found on the small door, and Millie puts together why she asked Nico to stop coming to the house. He then tells her that the police want to question Suzette. Millie gets an idea and asks Ramirez to take her to Suzette's hotel because she wants to talk to her. And at this point, I have no clue why, but there's about 20 pages left of the book, and I have a giant suspicion that Millie somehow found out about Jonathan and killed him. Okay, so they get to the hotel and they talk to Suzette, and then Ramirez tells Suzette not only did they find the little room, which she denies knowing about at first, but they also found her fingerprints and Braden's, the missing boy. They found his blood on the mattress. I called it, I said it, I called it. The police are digging up Suzette's backyard as they speak to find the body, and Millie tells Suzette that she is an accomplice to everything that Jonathan has done. Suzette claims that she didn't know about Braden until after, and that she didn't go to the police because it was already too late. Suzette tries to save face by saying she stayed with him to keep an eye on him and to stop him from doing it to other children. Wow. Everybody clap for Suzette. But she never went to the police because do you know what it would have done to my life? Millie then tells Suzette she has two choices. 1, go to jail for hiding a child's murder, or 2, say that she killed her husband in self-defense when she found the room. Obviously, one is much worse than the other. They leave her to make her choice because they don't want to be there once the detective shows up. 2 weeks later, all of them are sitting at the table eating breakfast. Suzette did end up confessing. Ramirez stops by to check in on them quickly. Apparently, he is dating Cece's mom now. Nina Winchester, she is from book 1 as well. We find out Millie has been stressing about Oda reasonably, but her blood pressure is miraculously perfect again. Why was that even a plot point? We switch to Oda's point of view for a chapter. She is in the library reading when a boy comes up and bothers her. Not Gabe, a different one that was bothering her throughout her little section, but I didn't bother mentioning him because it would have been a waste of time. She threatens to castrate him if he doesn't leave her and any other girls alone. He calls her a psychopath and runs away, and she looks into the window and sees her own reflection and thinks how funny it is that she looks like her mom now that she's getting older. Ooh. And then in the epilogue, we're in Martha's point of view. Martha is safely in a hotel in Long Island. Apparently, Martha worked for the family of the kid that Millie murdered that originally put her in jail. The one that tried to SA her friend that we learn about in book 1. That's how she knew about Millie and why she thought Millie could help her. Martha apparently told other prospective buyers lies like the fact that there's a moldy roof, to get them to drop out of purchasing. And that's how Millie and Enzo ended up getting the house for a steal, which was still out of their price range. As she was making her escape to somewhere else, Martha decides to stop by and steal some of Suzette's jewelry because she's running low on money. We see where this is going, don't we? Martha was walking down the stairs when she finds Jonathan standing with his stab wound looking around for Oda. He notices that she's stealing and tells Martha he's going to call the police out of fear of what her husband would do to her if he found out that she was in jail for stealing. Martha grabs a letter opener on a desk nearby and slits his throat. She hears Millie knock on the door and runs. Enzo doesn't notice her because he cut his hand and was trying to stop the bleeding with his shirt. Later, Martha saw that Enzo was being blamed and she was going to turn herself in, but didn't because Suzette beat her to it, and she thinks that Suzette's a terrible person, so why not? And then the book ends with Martha saying she was sure the police would find her, but no one ever suspects the housemaid. So obviously that is the entire book. I'll give you a little bit of my review just so that you can know my thoughts and opinions, even though I'm very certain that you, based off of how I've told you this story, you know I hate this book. So I did give this book 2 stars, which I think is gracious. This book is a waste of time, money, and paper. And this was a cash grab and nothing else. And I really hope that this is the last book in this series because the story has been over. Realistically, we didn't need more than 1 book. The second book I really enjoyed, so I give that one grace. But at this point, it's turning into a cash grab. And that's why I wanted to make this, because I don't want anybody else to waste their time reading this awful book. This book was lacking in everything that makes Freida books interesting. As you saw, absolutely nothing happened until the 50% mark where Jonathan died. It's just, ooh, there's a weird noise here, a strange encounter there. It's just bad exposition, trying to create suspense and mystery, but failing completely. And I've rated other Freida books lower, but honestly, now that I'm reading and reviewing everything, I kind of want to lower this book to a 1 star. Yeah, this was just genuinely such a waste of time and money, and I really hope that me suffering to make this video saves anyone watching this time and effort. Like I said, I still think book 1 and book 2 is decently good. The phephobia lives true in every book that she writes, but it's an interesting story if you need an interesting story, but this was a waste. I hope you enjoyed it, and you know, let me know. Did I do a good job at summarizing this book? Because at some points I really wanted to give up. If you like me or my videos, I would really appreciate a like, comment, and subscribe if you feel like it. I feel like I deserve it after this video. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Bye.